The poor servant. In a prosperous merchant city where wealth flowed like rivers and the wealthy displayed their riches with shameless pride, there lived a young woman named Elise who worked as a servant in one of the grandest households in the entire region. The house belonged to the Thornwood family, wealthy merchants who dealt in fine silks, precious spices and exotic goods from distant lands. And it was a place of such luxury and abundance that even the servants' quarters were more comfortable than most common people's homes. Crystal chandeliers hung from every ceiling, casting rainbow light across marble floors polished to mirror brightness. Tapestries woven with gold thread covered the walls, depicting scenes of mythical grandeur and historical triumph. The family dined on silver plates, wore clothes made from the finest fabrics in the world, and thought nothing of spending more on a single dinner party than most families earned in a year. Elise had come to work for the Thornwoods 5 years earlier when she was just 15 years old, orphaned and alone in the world after her parents died of fever within days of each other. She had no education beyond basic reading and arithmetic, no inheritance beyond the worn clothes on her back, and no prospects beyond finding work as a servant to wealthy families who needed extra hands to maintain their extravagant lifestyles. The Thornwoods had hired her initially as a scullery maid, the lowest position in the household, responsible for the dirtiest, most exhausting work. But Elise had proven herself so hardworking, so honest, so capable and reliable that she had gradually risen to become the head housekeeper's assistant, a position of relative respect and slightly better wages, though still firmly in the servant class with no realistic hope of ever rising above her station. Despite working in a house overflowing with wealth and luxury, Elise herself remained desperately poor. Her wages were modest, barely enough to cover her most basic needs, and she sent a portion of every payment to her younger brother Peter, who lived in an orphanage in a distant town and depended on her financial support to have any chance of learning a trade and escaping the grinding poverty that claimed so many children who had no family to care for them. This meant that Elise lived with almost nothing for herself, wearing the same 2 plain dresses year after year, eating simple food purchased from the cheapest vendors, and denying herself even small luxuries or pleasures that other servants might occasionally afford. Her room in the servants' quarters was sparse and plain, containing nothing but a narrow bed, a small trunk for her few possessions, and a single candle to read by in the evenings when her work was finally done. What made Elise's poverty even more difficult to bear was the constant proximity to wealth she could never possess, surrounded every day by luxury she could never afford, handling precious objects worth more than she would earn in her entire lifetime. She would dust priceless vases from faraway kingdoms, would polish silverware that cost more than a year of her wages, would arrange flowers in crystal vases that could have fed her brother for months if sold. She would serve elaborate meals to the Thornwood family and their wealthy guests, carrying platters of delicacies and rare foods while her own stomach sometimes ached with hunger because she'd skipped breakfast to save money to send to Peter. She would prepare luxurious bedchambers with silk sheets and down pillows while knowing she would return to her own hard, narrow bed with its thin blanket and lumpy mattress. But what truly distinguished Elise from many other servants in similar situations was her absolute, unwavering honesty and integrity that remained unshaken despite constant temptation and desperate need. Every single day, Elise handled valuable items that she could have easily stolen. Small pieces of jewelry left carelessly on dressing tables, coins forgotten in coat pockets, precious trinkets that wouldn't be missed from crowded shelves and drawers. The Thornwood family was so wealthy and so careless with their abundance that they would never notice if a silver spoon disappeared, if a gold coin went missing, if a small gem-encrusted box vanished from a cluttered shelf. Many servants in similar positions rationalized small thefts, convincing themselves that taking from those who had so much while they had so little was somehow justified, that the wealthy owed them more than their meager wages, that a small theft from abundance wasn't really stealing. But Elise never, not even once in 5 years of desperate poverty and constant temptation, took anything that didn't belong to her. Her parents had raised her to believe that honesty was sacred, that integrity was worth more than gold, that who you are matters more than what you have, and that stealing, regardless of justification or rationalization, was a betrayal of your own soul and a violation of fundamental moral truth. Your word and your honor are all you truly own, her father had told her when she was young, his weathered hands on her shoulders and his honest eyes looking into hers with serious love. Guard them with your life, Elise, because once you've sold your integrity for money or comfort or convenience, you can never buy it back. You may be poor in possessions, but you can be rich in character, and that's a wealth that no one can ever take from you. One particular winter evening, when snow fell thick and heavy outside the Thornwood mansion and the wealthy family was hosting an elaborate party for their equally wealthy friends, Elise was serving refreshments in the grand ballroom, a massive space filled with hundreds of guests dressed in silks and velvets, dripping with jewels, laughing and dancing and celebrating their prosperity with careless abundance. As Elise moved through the crowd carrying a silver tray of crystal glasses filled with expensive wine, she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold with shock and fear. Two merchants were discussing business near where she was serving, and they mentioned her employer Mr. Thornwood by name. "I hear Thornwood's entire fortune is built on fraud and deception," one merchant said quietly to the other, apparently not noticing or caring that a servant was nearby. "He's been smuggling illegal goods, avoiding taxes, bribing port officials and cheating his business partners for years. There's an investigation starting, and when the authorities uncover the truth, the entire Thornwood empire will collapse. Anyone associated with the family will be dragged down with them, questioned, possibly imprisoned, certainly tainted by association. If I were one of his servants, I'd take what I could carry and run before the scandal breaks and everything falls apart." Elise felt panic rise in her chest like icy water filling her lungs. If the Thornwood fortune collapsed, she would lose her position, would lose the wages she needed to support Peter, would be unemployed in a city where jobs were scarce and servants from disgraced households were viewed with suspicion and distrust. Worse, she might be caught up in the investigation, might be questioned or accused simply because she worked here, might find her already limited prospects destroyed completely by association with criminal employers. Her mind raced with desperate thoughts, and for the first time in her life, she seriously considered doing something dishonest to protect herself and her brother. Later that night, after the party had ended and the guest had departed and the other servants had gone to bed exhausted from the long evening's work, Elise found herself alone in Mrs. Thornwood's dressing room, putting away jewelry and expensive accessories that had been carelessly scattered across every surface. Among the glittering wealth was a small velvet pouch containing several valuable gemstones, emeralds and sapphires and diamonds that sparkled even in the dim candlelight. The pouch was small enough to hide in her dress pocket, valuable enough to support her and Peter for years, and unlikely to be missed among the overwhelming abundance of jewelry and valuables the Thornwoods possessed. Elise's hand trembled as she reached for the pouch, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears, her mind filled with conflicting thoughts that warred with each other like opposing armies. One voice in her head argued passionately for taking the gems. The Thornwoods are criminals who don't deserve their wealth anyway. They've probably stolen far more than this themselves. You need this money desperately. Peter needs it desperately. No one will ever know. This is your chance to escape poverty, to give your brother a real future, to have some security in an uncertain world. It's not really stealing from good people. It's taking from thieves and frauds who got their wealth dishonestly in the first place. But another voice spoke in her heart with her father's words and her mother's values and her own deep-seated beliefs about right and wrong. Theft is theft, regardless of who you're stealing from or why. If you take what doesn't belong to you, you become a thief yourself, and no amount of justification or rationalization changes that fundamental truth. Your parents raised you to be honest, taught you that integrity matters more than survival, showed you that who you are is more important than what you have. If you betray those values now, if you compromise your character for money, you'll have gained gems but lost something far more precious. Your own soul, your self-respect, the very core of who you are. Elise stood frozen for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, her hand hovering over the velvet pouch, tears streaming down her face as she wrestled with the most difficult decision of her young life. She thought about Peter, about his innocent face and his dependence on her, about the opportunities this money could buy him. She thought about her own desperate poverty, about years of hunger and cold and endless work with no hope of anything better. She thought about the Thornwoods and their criminal wealth, about how easy it would be to justify taking from those who had stolen so much themselves. But in the end, with a sob of both relief and anguish, Elise pulled her hand back without touching the gems. She couldn't do it. Couldn't betray her parents' teachings, couldn't become a thief no matter how desperate her circumstances, couldn't compromise the integrity that was the only thing of real value she possessed. She finished putting away the jewelry properly, returned the velvet pouch to its designated place in the jewelry box, and left the dressing room with empty pockets but a clear conscience, crying quietly as she walked back to her sparse room, wondering if she had just made a terrible mistake but knowing deep in her soul that she had made the only choice her character would allow. The next morning, Elise woke to chaos and commotion throughout the household. City guards had arrived at dawn to arrest Mr. Thornwood, and the entire mansion was being searched as part of the criminal investigation the merchants had mentioned. Servants were being questioned about their knowledge of the family's business dealings, and Elise's heart pounded with terror as she waited her turn to be interrogated by stern officials who looked at everyone with suspicion and distrust, assuming that servants in a criminal household must be complicit or at least aware of their employer's illegal activities. When Elise was finally brought before the lead investigator, a gray-haired official with sharp eyes and a skeptical expression, she was trembling with fear and exhaustion and the weight of her poverty and uncertainty pressing down on her like a physical burden. The investigator asked her many questions about the Thornwood family's business, about unusual activities she might have witnessed, about her own character and honesty. Elise answered every question truthfully, explaining that she was just a servant who cleaned and served and had no knowledge of or involvement in the family's business dealings, that she had simply worked hard and honestly to earn wages to support herself and her brother. The investigator studied her carefully, and then he asked a question that made Elise's breath catch in her throat. Last night, Mrs. Thornwood reported that a valuable pouch of gemstones has gone missing from her dressing room. Several servants had access to that room during and after the party. We're questioning everyone who might have taken it. Were you in Mrs. Thornwood's dressing room last night? And do you know anything about the missing jewelry? Elise felt the world tilt beneath her feet. The gems she had so desperately wanted to take, the gems she had refused to steal despite her overwhelming need, were now missing, which meant someone else had taken them and she would be among the suspects simply because she'd been in the room. If she was accused of theft, she would not only lose her position but potentially face criminal charges, imprisonment, a ruined reputation that would make it impossible to ever find work again. Her honesty, her integrity, her refusal to steal despite desperate temptation, none of it would matter if she was falsely accused and couldn't prove her innocence. Yes, sir, Elise said, her voice shaking but honest. I was in Mrs. Thornwood's dressing room last night after the party, putting away jewelry and accessories as is my usual duty. I saw the velvet pouch of gemstones. I even touched it briefly while organizing the jewelry box, but I did not take it. I placed it properly in its designated location in the jewelry box before I left the room. I swear on my parents' memory and my own honor that I did not steal anything. The investigator's expression was unreadable as he studied Elise's face, looking for signs of deception or guilt. Then he asked, "Can anyone verify your claim? Did anyone see you leaving the room without the gems? Is there any proof of your innocence beyond your word?" Elise felt despair wash over her because she knew the answer. "No, sir," she whispered, tears beginning to flow down her cheeks. "I was alone in the room. No one saw me. I have no proof beyond my word, my character, and the fact that I have worked in this household for 5 years without ever taking anything that didn't belong to me, despite having access to countless valuable items and despite living in poverty that would make theft tempting to almost anyone. My honesty is all I have to offer as evidence, and I understand that may not be enough to prove my innocence to your satisfaction." What Elise didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that the investigator was not just looking for stolen gems. He was also looking for honest people, for servants of genuine character and integrity who might be willing to testify truthfully about the Thornwood family's activities and who could be trusted to tell the truth even when it was difficult or disadvantageous. He had been testing her, and she had passed that test with her honest admission of having been in the room, her straightforward account of what happened, and her refusal to lie or evade even when doing so might have protected her from suspicion. "Your honesty is noted and appreciated," the investigator said, his stern expression softening slightly. "And as it happens, we have already caught the actual thief, another servant who was seen leaving the mansion early this morning with stolen goods and who confessed under questioning. You are not suspected of any wrongdoing, Miss Elise. In fact, based on my investigation and the testimony of other servants, you appear to be one of the few genuinely honest people in this household. You're free to go, and you should know that you will not be tainted by association with the Thornwood family's criminal activities. Your integrity speaks for itself." Elise nearly collapsed with relief, but the investigator wasn't finished speaking. "However," he continued, "you should know that this household will be dissolved. The Thornwood fortune is being seized by the state, and all servants will lose their positions. I understand you have a brother who depends on your financial support, and I also understand that you've maintained absolute honesty despite desperate poverty and constant temptation to steal. That kind of character is rare and valuable. I'd like to offer you a position in my own household. My wife needs a trustworthy housekeeper, and I need someone of proven integrity working in my home where sensitive official documents and valuable items are kept. The wages will be better than what you're currently earning, and there will be opportunities for advancement based on your continued good service. Elise stared at the investigator in shock, barely able to process what she was hearing. The position she was losing was being replaced with something better, and the integrity she had maintained despite overwhelming temptation was being rewarded rather than ignored or taken for granted. I would be honored to accept your offer, sir, she managed to say through tears of gratitude and relief. Thank you for seeing beyond my poverty and my circumstances to recognize my character. I promise I will serve your household with the same honesty and diligence I've shown here. But the story's most remarkable turn came several weeks later, after Elise had settled into her new position in the investigator's household. She received a letter from an unexpected source, a wealthy elderly woman named Lady Constance who had been a guest at that final Thornwood party and who had been watching Elise serve throughout the evening. Lady Constance wrote that she had been impressed by Elise's demeanor, her careful attention to her work, and something indefinable about her character that showed even in how she carried herself and treated others. When Lady Constance learned about what had happened after the party, about the investigation, about Elise's honesty in the face of false accusation, about her years of maintaining integrity despite desperate poverty, she had been so moved that she decided to take action. The letter explained that Lady Constance had no children of her own, that she had been searching for someone of genuine character to mentor and potentially make her heir, and that Elise's demonstrated integrity had convinced her that she had found someone worthy of that trust and investment. I would like to sponsor your education, the letter said, and provide financial support for your brother's apprenticeship so he can learn a proper trade. More than that, if you prove over time to be the person of character I believe you to be, I wish to make you my ward and eventually my heir. I have wealth but no family, and I would rather leave my fortune to someone who has proven they can be trusted with it. Someone who maintained honesty even when dishonesty would have been easier and more profitable, someone who valued integrity more than survival. Your poverty has not corrupted you, and that makes you far richer than many wealthy people I know. I believe you deserve opportunities that your circumstances have denied you, and I wish to provide them. Elise read the letter 3 times before she could believe it was real, before she could accept that her years of honesty and integrity, the character she had maintained despite every temptation and every hardship, were being rewarded so abundantly and unexpectedly. She wrote back accepting Lady Constance's generous offer, and thus began a relationship that transformed both their lives. Lady Constance gained the daughter she'd always wanted, and Elise gained not just wealth and education but a mother figure who valued her for who she was rather than what she could do or how she could serve. Years later, when Elise was a young woman of means and education, she would often speak to young people about her experiences, sharing the lessons she had learned during those hard years of poverty and service. I know what it's like to be desperately poor, she would say, her voice carrying the authority of lived experience. I know what it's like to be surrounded by wealth you can never possess, to have access to things you could easily steal, to face overwhelming temptation to compromise your integrity for survival or comfort. And I'm here to tell you that your character, your honesty, your integrity, the principles you maintain even when no one is watching, is worth more than any amount of money or material comfort you might gain by betraying those values. She would tell them about the night she almost stole the gemstones, about the internal battle between desperate need and fundamental values, about the choice she made to leave with empty pockets and a clear conscience. If I had stolen those gems, she would explain, I might have had money for a while, but I would have lost something far more precious: my self-respect, my integrity, my very identity as an honest person. And ironically, that theft would have made me unemployable in the household where I met Lady Constance, would have prevented the very blessings that came because people recognized and valued my honesty. Your character is your most valuable asset, and unlike money that can be spent or lost, character that's genuine and deeply rooted will sustain you through any circumstance and open doors you can't even imagine. Elise used her inherited wealth to establish a home for orphan children, ensuring they received education, training, and opportunities that poverty would otherwise deny them. She made sure her brother Peter received the finest education available, and he grew up to become a successful merchant who built his fortune honestly, always remembering the lessons his sister had taught him about integrity and character. Annalise herself became known throughout the region not primarily for her wealth but for her wisdom, her character, and her unwavering commitment to honesty and integrity that had defined her even in her poorest, most desperate days. She kept in her room, even after becoming wealthy, the 2 plain dresses she had worn during her years of service, hanging them in her wardrobe as reminders of where she had come from and who she had chosen to be when being honest was hardest and most costly. And whenever she faced difficult decisions or moral dilemmas, she would look at those dresses and remember the poor servant she had once been, the young woman who had chosen integrity over comfort, honesty over survival, character over material gain. And she would make her choices based on the same values that had guided her then, understanding that true wealth isn't measured in possessions or money but in the quality of character we maintain regardless of our circumstances. And the story of the poor servant who refused to steal despite desperate need became a legend in the region, told to children and adults alike as a reminder that integrity matters, that honesty is its own reward, and that who we choose to be in our hardest moments defines us far more than our circumstances or our possessions ever could. For Elise had discovered a profound truth, that the only wealth you can truly keep is the wealth of character, and that maintaining your integrity when it costs you everything is the surest path to becoming truly rich in the ways that matter most.